There is a generation that built the internet, survived 4 recessions, invented the side hustle before anyone had a name for it, and somehow ended up as the financial footnote between 2 louder demographic stories. Boomers get the real estate obsession analysis. Millennials get the avocado toast retrospectives and the student debt documentaries. Gen Z gets the TikTok finance coverage and the crypto origin narratives. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980, currently ages 44 to 59, gets silence. And yet their financial behavior contains something that no generational analysis has correctly identified. Not contradiction. Not confusion. Not the muddled compromise between boomer conservatism and millennial anxiety that most financial media assumes when it bothers to look at all. What Generation X's financial behavior contains is a complete, coherent, internally consistent operating system, built not from theory, not from cultural inheritance, not from financial advisor recommendations, but from direct, repeated, high-stakes exposure to an economy that changed its rules without notice and expected them to adapt without complaint. Consider 3 behaviors that appear, on the surface, to contradict each other completely. A Gen X household carries an average of $157,556 in total debt, the highest of any generation, while simultaneously maintaining the most strategic debt composition and the highest rate of on-time payment of any cohort. The same household that won't replace a 15-year-old vehicle because it still runs will spend $500 on concert tickets without hesitation. And a generation that cheerily associates documents as the lowest utilizer of traditional financial advisors of any demographic cohort reads more personal finance books per capita than any other. High debt, strategic management. Frugal on possessions, generous on experiences. Distrusts advisors, studies finance obsessively. Financial analysts call this contradictory. Behavioral economists, developmental psychologists, and institutional researchers call it something else entirely. They call it the precisely calibrated adaptive response of a generation whose financial decision-making architecture was formed during 4 discrete economic trauma events, whose institutional trust was systematically dismantled by the largest structural betrayal in American retirement history, and whose every apparently irrational financial behavior maps with clinical precision onto documented psychological defense mechanisms that are operating exactly as designed. Generation X is not confused about money. They are the most accurately calibrated generation in America, calibrated to an economic reality that every other generation was too protected, too early, or too late to fully experience. Here is the mechanism. Sarah Jane Blakemore at University College London, using fMRI imaging to study adolescent brain development, documents that experiences during what neuroscience calls sensitive periods, roughly ages 8 through 16, produce disproportionately durable neural encoding compared to equivalent experiences at any other life stage. The reason is heightened synaptic plasticity during adolescent brain development, which causes emotionally charged experiences to encode with unusual permanence in the prefrontal cortex amygdala circuit, the specific neural architecture responsible for financial threat detection and risk assessment in adult decision-making. Now place Generation X's formative years against the economic calendar. The 1979 through 1982 double-dip recession reached peak unemployment of 10.8%, the highest since the Great Depression, when the oldest Gen Zers were teenagers and the youngest were still in elementary school. The 1987 Black Monday crash produced the largest single-day S&P 500 loss in market history, a 22.6% collapse in one trading session, when the majority of the cohort was between ages 7 and 22. Directly inside the sensitive period window for a substantial portion of the generation. The 1990 through 1991 recession followed. And then, when Gen X had spent 2 decades building careers, accumulating home equity, and contributing to 401k plans, the 2008 financial crisis arrived. Pew Research Center analysis of Federal Reserve flow of funds data found that Gen X median net worth fell 45% between 2007 and 2010, the largest proportional decline of any generation, because Gen X was at peak mortgage exposure, peak 401k accumulation, and peak career investment simultaneously. The 2008 crisis did not merely damage Gen X financially. It neurologically confirmed the threat schema that had been encoding since childhood. Their worst-case calibration was not pessimism. It was prediction. But there is a structural layer beneath the neural one that most analysis entirely omits. Bureau of Labor Statistics data documents one of the most consequential and least discussed economic transitions in American history. In 1975, 88% of private sector workers had defined benefit pension coverage, a guaranteed income floor for life, funded by the employer, bearing zero investment risk for the employee. By 2024, that figure stands at 15%. The collapse was not gradual and even. It was concentrated. And when you overlay the Gen X workforce entry window, 1982 through 1998, with the BLS timeline, the line drops directly through their entry years. They are the first generation to bear the full weight of this transition across their entire working lifetime. Their parents had pensions. They received 401k plans and a new responsibility for investment decisions their parents never had to make, in a market environment their parents never had to navigate alone. The legislation that eliminated their retirement security floor, ERISA in 1974, the 401k regulation in 1978, was enacted before most of them were teenagers. They inherited the consequences of a policy decision made before they had any voice in it. Now consider what the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies documents in their 2023 survey. 70% of Gen X report significant fear about retirement security. And simultaneously, above-average 401k contribution rates. To most observers, this is paradox. To psychologist Julie Norum at Wellesley College, whose 30-year research program on defensive pessimism was published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, this is a clinical textbook case of an adaptive cognitive strategy operating precisely as designed. Defensive pessimism, as Norum formally defined it, is the pattern of setting unrealistically low expectations in order to harness anxiety as motivation for thorough preparation. And crucially, her research establishes that defensive pessimists outperform optimists in high-stakes, genuinely uncertain environments. Their anxiety is not the obstacle to performance. It is the engine of preparation that produces better outcomes when conditions are actually volatile. In a retirement environment where Social Security faces documented actuarial pressure and pension coverage has reached 15%, defensive pessimism is not a neurotic response. It is the actuarially correct one. The same institutional betrayal sequence that produced the retirement anxiety also produced something Julian Rotter's foundational locus of control research, and subsequent work by Gail Heyman, documents with precision. When trusted external agents, pension trustees, employers, financial institutions, fail at the precise moment when failure is most costly, the individuals affected shift systematically toward internal locus of control. Outcomes determined by my own actions, not by external agents I cannot monitor or control. Cerulli Associates documents that Gen X has the lowest traditional financial advisor utilization rate of any generation. This is not arrogance. It is the rational Bayesian update of a generation that watched institutional agents fail sequentially, pensions disappeared, companies rewarded decades of loyalty with layoffs, home values collapsed, and financial advisor recommendations proved catastrophically wrong in 2008. The self-managed portfolio is not the choice of overconfidence. It is the choice of a generation that ran the data on external versus internal management and drew the correct conclusion from their own experimental results. Now the behavior that receives the most external judgment, the experiential spending. Eventbrite data documents Gen X spending more than $3,000 annually on live events and experiences. Research by Leif Van Boven and Thomas Gilovich, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology in 2003, established through controlled experiments that experiential purchases produce higher lasting well-being than material purchases, because experiences resist hedonic adaptation, integrate more deeply into identity, and are less susceptible to social comparison. But Gen X did not need the 2003 paper. They had already run the stress test. In 2008 and 2009, material assets experienced their verdict. Home values declined an average of 33%. 401k balances fell 45%. The Pearl Jam concert from 1994, the road trip from 2001, the live event from 2009, none of these filed for bankruptcy protection. None of these required a government bailout. None of these issued a revised net asset value. The memory held its value through every crisis, the portfolio did not. Van Boven and Gilovich formalized the theory in a controlled laboratory setting. Gen X proved it empirically, with real money, in the actual economy, across real decades. They reached identical conclusions. Gen X simply got there first. Then there is the debt architecture. Experian's 2023 State of Credit Report documents $157,556 average Gen X total debt, the highest of any generation. Richard Thaler's mental accounting theory, recognized by the Nobel Committee in Economics in 2017, establishes that debt is not a monolithic category. It exists in psychologically distinct accounts with fundamentally different structural characteristics. A mortgage, amortizing, asset-backed, finite timeline, inflation-hedged, occupies a categorically different mental account than a credit card balance, revolving, consumption-financed, potentially infinite, compound rate exposed. Gen X's debt composition is overwhelmingly the first category. Their consumer debt avoidance was not learned from Thaler's 1985 paper in the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization. It was learned by watching consumer debt swallow their parents in the 1980s before Thaler formalized it theoretically. They operationalized Nobel Prize-winning behavioral economics a decade before the Nobel Committee recognized it. The invisible variable that most generational wealth analysis completely omits is documented in Pew Research Center's Sandwich Generation Report, updated in 2022, and confirmed by Fidelity's 2023 institutional research. Approximately 47% of adults in their 40s and 50s are simultaneously providing financial support to aging parents and financial support to adult children. Generation X is the peak sandwich generation cohort right now. Fidelity quantifies the outflow at an average of $3,200 per month in combined assistance, effectively a second mortgage payment, leaving their net worth simultaneously as their own retirement savings window is measured in years rather than decades. Standard generational wealth comparisons ask why Gen X has not accumulated more given their income levels and documented savings rates. The $3,200 per month is the answer that nobody includes in the comparison. They are not saving less than they should. They are supporting more people than any standard analysis accounts for. The brand loyalty, Adobe documents Gen X is 34% more loyal to legacy brands than millennials, and the paper records, AARP documents 61% of Gen X maintain physical document files versus 34% of millennials, both resolve under a single framework. Terror management theory, developed by Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Piskzinski, establishes that in environments of institutional instability, humans seek symbolic continuity, connection to entities that have proven their persistence through uncertainty. The brand that maintained its identity and quality through 3 recessions is an empirically validated reliability signal in an environment where institutional reliability is the scarcest resource available. And the paper records are not technological conservatism. They are the consumer-level implementation of enterprise information resilience architecture, redundancy by design, the standard protocol for mission-critical systems, applied at the household level by a generation that watched institutional data management failures erase real financial records affecting real people's real outcomes. Generation X built the Internet. They also watched what happened when people trusted it completely. Every behavior resolves under one framework. Defensive pessimism produces consistent savings despite persistent anxiety. The locus of control shift produces self-managed portfolios over advisor dependency. Trauma-encoded threat detection produces multiple income streams over single-source reliance. Material asset distrust produces experience economy spending over possession accumulation. Mental accounting produces strategic debt architecture over undifferentiated debt avoidance. Institutional distrust produces brand loyalty to proven entities over perpetual novelty seeking. And information resilience produces physical record redundancy over exclusive digital dependency. None of these are contradictions. They are 7 outputs of one coherent input. A generation that learned the hard version of every financial lesson the economy had to teach, not from textbooks, not from advisors, not from parental guidance in a stable environment, but from direct exposure to an economy that restructured itself mid-game and expected adaptation without acknowledgement. The child who stood in a bank in 1983 and watched the certainty of that world begin its slow dissolution did not learn that effort is futile. They learned that effort is essential, and that no institution is contractually obligated to reward it on the timeline promised. So they built their own systems. They saved what nobody could legislate away. They bought experiences nobody could repossess. They developed skills nobody could downsize. And they kept paper records nobody's server failure could erase. That is not confusion. That is architecture. Built from experience. Validated by history. And more sophisticated than any generation that inherited stability without ever being required to construct it from scratch. The retirement savings window this generation currently occupies has a measurable closing date. The behavioral and structural framework mapped here connects directly to the specific financial decisions the next decade will make permanent. The analysis of what those decisions look like in practice, and what they cost when delayed, continues in the video linked above this one.